Welcome to Tracing Your Family Roots. My name is Arlene Sachs. My co-host is Sally Ann Sack, and we'd like to welcome today Bennett Greenspan. Welcome. Bennett is the CEO of Family Tree DNA, and he's our DNA expert, and he's going to tell us all about why we should get our DNA tested and so on. Welcome. I'm delighted that you could be here.
Well, thank you for having me.
And we should also say this could be a double show. Unfortunately, it's going to be hard to restrain our questions.
Before we get started, I got to point out your tie, which I absolutely love, which is a DNA tie, and shows the DNA. So now we can get started. Go ahead.
I guess what I want to say is, why don't you start with telling us what is DNA testing? You know, just the basic, what do you do?
What I do primarily is I look at the Y chromosome, which is passed down from a father to all of his sons, and then those sons pass that Y chromosome down to their sons, literally unaltered for generations. Therefore, if we take two men and we look at their Y chromosomes, if they have an identical Y chromosome, it means that they share a recent common male ancestor. Now, if that recent common male ancestor is recent enough since the time that people were assigned surnames, then the surname will be the same and the Y chromosome will be the same, which helps, of course, in genealogical tracing.
In other words, you can tell me, my current interest is that I'm tracing Amder. It's my maiden name. I want to know if a whole bunch of Amders I've found, all of which trace themselves back to the same little town in Lithuania in the middle of the 18th century. My assumption is they must all descend from a single person. But I could do a DNA study. We could get men in this group, all of whose last name is the same, and do a study, and you might be able to tell us if they have a single common ancestor?
Well, we will be able to tell you if you test several men with the same surname whether in fact they do have a common male ancestor, or whether one or two or half of them have a different common male ancestor. And of course, in that latter case, it would mean that when the name was assigned in that particular part of Europe, that a tax collector assigned to two unrelated men the same surname, and that happens sometimes.
Only if you're a Galicianer, Bennett. If you're a Litvak,
it would never happen.
The Jews of Lithuania took their own names. The naming was done within their community. So the history of how names came about is relevant in this time.
Okay, let me ask another question. We just mentioned DNA in general, and there are many parts of DNA, but you're really only testing a small portion of that DNA, 12 or 25 or 37?
Well, first of all, when we talk about DNA, there are 23 chromosomes. The first 22 chromosomes are what give us our physical appearance, our eye color, our hair color, our health, those sorts of things. Then the 23rd chromosome is the Y chromosome, which does not recombine in every generation like the 22 autosomal chromosomes do. So we're only focusing on the Y chromosome itself, which is about 1% of a man's genome. In other words, only 1% of who I am did I actually get by obtaining a Y chromosome from my father. Then what we look at is various sections of the Y chromosome, and we use that as a basis of comparison to compare two men to show whether they have the same DNA signature as each other or whether they don't. Of course, in Sally's case, she's already told us that she's expecting that her Ambers are going to all match each other, and it'll be interesting. Maybe it'll be another show where she'll be able to make those reports.
Well, in my husband's case, he's a Sachs, and he didn't match any of the Saxes when he had it done.
But that's what Bennett calls unrecorded paternity. I think
Well,
that elegant phrase that you use.
Well,
No, in his case, it's all co-names, so we assume that he took the name Sachs for some other reason.
Mm-hmm.
Well, again, if men share a common Y chromosome, it means that they're related closely. But since we've had our Y chromosome for thousands of years, and we've only had our surnames for a few hundred years, those surnames may have changed. There may have been a reason for them to change. For example, I deal a lot in genealogy with people from Scotland, and there happens to be a clan in Scotland that became a forbidden clan, and you have men from that clan changing their name to a dozen different names, and now they're trying to reconstruct who is actually related to whom in the clan, because they've had this mass diffusion of surnames. And the only way to untangle that, of course, is with DNA.
I wanted to ask you the error question. When we read about DNA, it doesn't say within certain limits this is, or we'll say 95%, but we don't hear about the possibility of lab error, which is what you hear about when you go to the doctor and you get a result you don't like. How can error enter into your studies, and in what way, and how do you watch out for that so that we have some faith in what you're doing?
Well, certainly wherever the human element is involved, you have the potential for an error.
Okay.
To mitigate or to reduce that, what we've done is all of our DNA kits come with a barcode, actually with a couple barcodes, one on each of the vials. When that barcode comes back to our office, it's scanned into our system. We'll then transmit a file to the University of Arizona. When they receive your kit, they will then read the barcode. That tells them where to put that on a plate, which has 96 samples. The plate itself is barcoded, so everything is barcoded in the process. So that should effectively eliminate or nearly eliminate any possibility for a lab error that's caused by mixing up tubes either at our office or at the University of Arizona. There's always the possibility that a husband and a wife both buy a DNA test, they sit at the dinner table, they scrape their cheek, and they put the vials in each other's bag and send it back to us. And then on the lab scoring end, some of these markers are very, very complex, and on a few of the markers it does come down to that subjective, quote unquote, I called it this. You might call a 14 actually a 15. It's very, very rare, but we have a very liberal policy which says if you didn't match another SAC or SACs and you thought you should have, and they're one marker off, we have a lab review system where the lab actually goes back and will pull up the score sheet from each of those individuals and look at them side by side.
That's if your customer has written back to you.
That's if the customer has written back. And then also we have individuals who unfortunately on a rare occasion will find that they don't match someone who their genealogy says they must match, at which point we just go back and we rerun each of those individuals from their second vial to see if in fact they match what we told them the first run. And I would say that well over 98% of those retests or the lab confirmations where we view the ferrograms come back identical to where they were before. So we're looking at only people who question are now coming back and finding that 98, 99% of those are in fact as they were originally called. That doesn't mean that a mistake is not going to ever happen. Doctors bury their mistakes and lawyers' mistakes go to jail. I have to call and tell someone that we made a mistake and wipe the egg off my face. And I think that's going to happen in very, very, very rare instances. But to say it can't happen or never happened or won't happen is actually rather silly.
Bennett, you've been doing this now for 7 years?
The
Family Tree DNA has been in existence for 7 years?
It's May of 2007, and I started the company officially in April of 2000.
Okay. At this point, I know you keep databases so that sometimes somebody will send in a sample and they'll come back with, you've matched several other people who've had their DNA tested with you. That's one of the services you offer. How many people are in your database? Well, I want to know how many Jewish people. Can you tell me that? Because I'm a Jewish genealogist.
I'm going to guess that we have about 4,000 Jewish samples on file. And while that doesn't sound like a lot, it is clearly close to critical mass. And the reason I can say that is
and
because...
And define critical mass.
Yeah, and the reason I can say that is that if I test someone whose name was never in our database before, and they don't match anyone, we're not to a point of critical mass. If, on the other hand, they match 2 or 5 or 25 other people, then we've seen their DNA signature long, long ago. And so if the typical viewer today said, Bennett, if I test with you, will I have any matches, even if they're not matches with my same surname, because I'm related to them prior to the time that Jews were assigned or took on surnames in our various parts of Europe, what's my likelihood of actually matching someone? I would say at this point probably 80 or 90% of our individual Jewish clients who come in actually match someone within our system.
Now, are you matching on 12 or 25 or 30?
We actually match on every marker panel level that we test for. So for example, if someone tests at 12 markers and they have a match with someone at 12, they would see that on their personal page. They would get an email from us, and so they would be alerted that they have a new match. If they extended their test on to 25 markers and continue to match that same individual, then they will again be able to see that on their personal page, and they'll get an email from us.
Why don't you talk a little bit about the difference between the 12, the 25, and the 37, and the advantages?
Okay. Essentially, in my personal Greenspan project, I start everyone out at 12 markers. Why? Because I want people to get, including myself, to get the biggest bang for the smallest amount of dollars spent. And so if you join a surname project at Family Tree DNA, a 12-marker test is about $100. If a Greenspan male tests within my Greenspan project and doesn't match anyone that's already in the project, there's no advantage for that person to have done a 25 or a 37 or a 67 marker test. But if that Greenspan matches two other Greenspans exactly on 12 markers, then I'm inclined to see all three of them upgrade to the 25 because I want to see if they continue to hang together. Now once we have done a 12 marker test or a 25 marker test, we can then apply what we call the Family Tree DNA Time Prediction Calculator,
Yes.
which will give a range of time when those two people likely shared their most recent common male ancestor. And so when you're adding additional markers to the extent that those markers between two men continue to match, we're able to give a more precise estimate of when that common ancestor may have lived.
Okay, so what's the finest? So I assume then if you go to the 67 markers, and markers are like a locus. I mean, they're loci. I mean, they're a place along. Okay. If you go to the 67, does that mean generally then you're lowering the range of year? You're reducing the number of years to closer to the present?
Sally Ann, that's exactly right. The more markers you use, the more tightly we can predict in a compressed amount of time when that common ancestor may have lived. So for example, we're all related if we go back far enough. If we go back 60 or 70 or 80,000 years, every male on the planet is related. But that's not genealogy, that's anthropology. So by using more and more markers, it's like more and more hurdles that you have to jump over, and to the extent that I test and another Greenspan tests, if we test and we find that we're identical on 12 markers, it's as if we're a hurdle runner and each of us have jumped over 12 markers. As you add more markers to the system, it becomes more and more difficult for you to randomly match an individual. And so we can then more precisely say, you are related, we're extremely confident that you're related, and you're related in a shorter time period, which of course as genealogists, that's what we want to find out.
Can I ask a question that goes a little bit more, I guess, to the anthropology? You're also doing the testing for National Geographic. Are you testing the same kinds of, or the same locations for that?
In National Geographic, we have a little bit different protocol. What we're doing is we're testing the identical 12 markers, but we're guaranteeing to all National Geographic customers what's called the SNP. That is the location on the tree of mankind that you descend from. So for example, we were talking earlier today about a Semitic group called J1, which I happen to be a descendant of. So our National Geographic customers would be guaranteed to not only know what their 12 marker values were, but also that they are on a branch J1 or J2, which is a Semitic branch, E3B, which is North African, R1B, which would be Western European, because National Geographic has a very, very exciting and ambitious program to map out the migration path of Homo sapiens since our deep ancestors left Africa. In effect, they're filling the white space of the map of human migration, but they also allow anyone who tests with National Geographic to move their results into the family tree DNA database. So not only can they enjoy an anthropological story, but they can also join the family tree DNA database, and then they can use that same data genealogically.
Now, do you use the family tree one? Does that also go into National Geographic?
No.
Customers of Family Tree, for a $15 donation to the National Geographic Legacy Project, can actually put their results into the National Geographic database, and then they can see the migration path that National Geographic customers could see.
And migration is on my mind. You said about 4,000 Jewish DNA's results.
On the male side.
And then you spoke of Europe. Are you talking 4,000 Ashkenazi Jews, or do you also have some significant Sephardic Jewish population?
I think probably about 3,300 of my guesstimated 4,000 samples are Ashkenazim, because most of the testing that we have done has taken place in America, and the majority of American Jews are Ashkenazim. But we also have a few hundred Sephardim who have tested with us. I also have available for comparisons a private, unpublished database by my colleague, Dr. Doron Bahar, who has written a number of studies on Ashkenazi populations, and 2007 is the year he's going to be writing and publishing about the Sephardic populations.
That makes me then want to go ahead. What would you wish, if we said to you, what would you like, first, I forgot, for the viewers who don't know Ashkenazim and Sephardim, Ashkenazim are Jews who came from Europe, basically, yes.
Correct.
And Sephardim are Jews who came from the Mediterranean basin, Spain to Iraq.
Actually, the way Dr. Bahar defines this is he refers to Ashkenazim and non-Ashkenazim. By referring to everyone who's not Ashkenazim as non-Ashkenazim, he's including both Mizrahi Jews who went to the east and may have never come back to Israel after the destruction of the First Temple, and also Sephardic Jews who probably took the same migration path out of Israel as the Ashkenazim, but then moved over to Spain and, of course, have a different culture and history. It appears that when the Jews were expelled from Spain in 1492, that essentially the Sephardim went to 4 countries. It appears they went to Morocco in substantial numbers, as well as Greece, Turkey, and Bulgaria. And so Dr. Bahar has been aggressively testing Jews who hail from those countries so that he can get a good picture of the genetic structure, so that he can make comparisons between the non-Ashkenazim population and the Ashkenazi population, which has actually been fairly well tested by now.
Yes. So then, if you had a wish list, what would you like to tell people who are watching you today?
If I had a wish list, I think the first item, and maybe the only item on my wish list, is you should test. And you should test for a couple reasons. Number one, in my opinion, knowing where you came from makes it easier to understand the path that you're on and where you're going to go as an individual. We can clearly put you as an Ashkenazi or even as a Sephardic Jew in the context of the greater Ashkenazi or Sephardic communities. And the third reason I wish that every Jewish person would test, or one person from every Jewish family or every Jewish surname would test, is because in effect what you're doing is you're taking a pole and sticking it in the ground or in the sand, saying this is a Jewish DNA signature. Now that allows us to do some rather interesting things. We get phone calls all the time from people who think they have a Jewish ancestry, whether they be in Brazil, whether they be in Guatemala, whether they be in Mexico, or whether they are European non-Jews who believe that they have a Jewish ancestor and they want to prove that fact, and only by having good, firm, solid, comparative databases can I provide those people an intelligent answer. Now, I had mentioned a little bit earlier to you when we were off camera that a fellow Polish Catholic came to us in 2004 wanting to know about his mother's line. As it turned out, on his mother's line, he matched 3 people who had been tested in Dr. Bahar's 2004 Ashkenazi study. He matched 5 or 6 people, several of whom had come to us because they had found us on Jewish Gen, and others who had just heard about us in the press. The bottom line is that he matched on his mother's line only Eastern European Jews, which tended to confirm the rumor in the story that his mother had been given up as a child, less than 2 months old, to a Polish Catholic couple at a train station in eastern Poland 3 weeks before the Jewish community was liquidated in that city. And so we were actually able to tell an individual, your mother's mother was a hidden child from World War II, and without having other Jewish people who have tested, I'm unable to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was quite a remarkable kind of thing to do. You know, I just realized you told people that you said scrape your cheek, and people watching may not know what you're talking about. I send you my $99 from my Amder cousin, and he gets what in the mail, and what exactly does he do? What's the step-by-step procedure?
Well, what he's going to get is a cheek scraper, which has a cotton tip on it, kind of like a Q-tip, and he's going to take it on the inside of his mouth. He's going to scrape for 20 or 30 seconds. He's then going to take the end of the scraper and push it, and that'll eject the tip into a collection tube that we have, which has a buffer in it that's designed to arrest bacterial growth, so the DNA won't get eaten up by any bacteria when it's on its way back to us. And you'll just take those vials with the swab tip in them and mail them back to us, and we'll take it from there.
You've really designed a very technologically clever system.
And it's very simple to do.
Oh,
It
yeah.
takes 30 seconds each time.
You mentioned going to the University of Arizona. That's Mike Hammer's.
That's correct.
When he was at the conference, the genealogy conference in Salt Lake City in 2000, he and Harry Osterer, they were collecting DNA samples, but we had a little tube of scope, I think it was, and we swished and spit. This is more elegant.
Yes, actually, using the scope method works very, very well. We get huge amounts of DNA. The problem is sending 3 or 4 ounces of liquid in the mail. The post office would rather have you not do that, and so the cheek scraper seems to be a great compromise.
Now, do you use all 3 of them? Or do you just set a couple aside?
Well, typically, we'll send 3 scrapers because we found that lots of our customers are coming back and want us to sell them more and more tests. And eventually, you're going to run out of the DNA that comes from one of those scrapers, even no matter how vigorously someone scrapes. And so, in effect, the second scraper is only provided in the event you drop the first scraper, or you don't do a very good job scraping, or you just want to buy every single test that our company sells and we run out of DNA. And we have the third one in effect for the same reason. And we've just started shipping a 3rd scraper along with the kits within the last 6 or 8 months.
But you don't keep these extras on hand.
Sure we do.
Oh, so you mean if this one cousin that I had a hard time finding, who's the only Amder in my line today, if he scrapes his cheek just once, and then later I say, now we have to do a 25, a 37, or a 67, you still have his DNA around?
We still have his DNA.
You just have to
Family Tree DNA is a DNA preservation service and a matching service. So consequently, we send out free emails. There's no subscription fee with our company, so we send you out emails telling you that you have a match whenever a new person comes in to match, and we preserve your DNA for 25 years.
Fabulous. Oh, that's wonderful. So then there's no huge rush to get everybody to move up. What's the statistical chance that I've got all these Amders who trace back to Breslov in the middle of the 18th century? How many markers do you think I'll need to know get somebody to say to me, you have a common ancestor and he probably lived around that time?
I would start at the 12 marker level.
You might be able to say that with 12?
With 12, I can say these people are or are not related to these other people. So I'll be able to bisect these 5 or 10 men. And then from that point, you might find that you want to upgrade to 25 just because you want a tighter prediction of when they shared a common ancestor, or you might want to subgroup them. In other words, these two men are more related to these
Yeah, because
other three.
they descend from somebody who was born a generation later, kind of thing.
I don't want to interrupt you, but I do want to say that anybody that's watching can look at our website, tracingroots.nova.org. We will have a link to your website so that somebody can get onto your website and order the materials directly from them. So tracingroots.nova.org is our website. Do you want to quickly say yours?
Our company website is familytreedna.com.
That's easy enough. So
That's wonderful.
and we just have like a little over a minute left. Is there something that you want to add that we haven't touched, or something really quick?
Well, I want to say that we also test females, and we test females and we compare those female DNA signatures to Dr. Bahar's 2004 Ashkenazi study so that we can tell you which group of females you come from. It's not as elegant as testing the male for biological reasons, not for any personal reasons. Female DNA is more stable, which means it changes less often, which means that you end up finding more people in bigger groups, whereas on the male side, because it is not as stable and changes more often, we find smaller groups but more of them.
Well, thank you very much. It's really been fantastic having you here again.
It's been a pleasure
and
being here today.
I've really enjoyed it, and I wish I could understand all of it.
Bennett explains it very
well.
I'm very impressed, and he's the only person I know whose signature on his mail says, "Contact us anytime."
And we mean it.
I know, you answer right away.
Yes, we did get an answer when we wrote. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just-